So we are 2 minutes past, so I'm going to get underway. Very briefly from me, welcome to today's session. I will say again, we are sharing the recording and the slides afterwards. I'm delighted to have two guests today. So we've got Ryan, who is a consultant solicitor. You may have been on a session with Ryan before, and really delighted to have him involved. Absolutely brilliant content in terms of renters' rights, and been covering that for a while now. And in terms of the kind of topic today, it's one of the ones that I've been most requested to cover. So when I got asked to do this, Ryan was my first thought. So I'm delighted that he's agreed to join us. I'm equally delighted that we've got Ali Collins with us today. So Ali is our head of research. So when Ryan's covered the initial content, Ali's going to cover some of her latest research. So it is a little bit more widely sort of the student feedback and insight that we have, but some specifically relevant insight in relation to this topic. So hopefully you'll find that extremely useful. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ryan.
Thanks very much, Nick. It's a very charming introduction. Now I've got a fair bit of stuff to go through because we're going to do a little bit of a crash course on licenses and how they differ from tenancies. We also need to allow enough time for Ali to give out her very important research and also some Q&A at the end. So I'm hoping to anticipate some questions in the next coming slides because I dare say I know why a fair few of you are here. But yeah, if you have questions, like I said, there's a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So maybe wait until my slides are done because I might answer the question and then we can get perhaps some specific stuff at the end. Okay, if my slides work, they do, fantastic. Right, so the elephant in the room, why are we here? Why are you landlords giving up your Wednesday morning to come and listen to this talk? Well, that's because of the Renters' Rights Act. And I dare say most of you want to try and avoid giving out assured tenancies. I'm also just going to assume most of you, because it's obviously hosted by Nick and his company, most of you are student landlords. And I'm also going to assume most of you are running what you might call smaller properties. I'm not talking to massive developers. We're not talking to the PBSA market here. They don't need to be on this call because they, of course, have their own exemption to the Renters' Rights Act. So they perhaps don't need to worry about the distinction between tenancies and licenses. I will say PBSA can create licenses if they want to, but they don't really have the same incentive as let's say the smaller HMO landlords do. So let's think about what alternatives there might be, because it isn't a given that licenses are like the silver bullet for the Renters' Rights Act if you want to avoid that entirely. It may well be that it is too onerous or too legally ambiguous to create the licenses, and you may just think, okay, better the devil we know, and just go with the assured model, which allows you to serve your ground 4A notice and try and artificially create a fixed term that way. But with obviously the issues relating to tenants giving notice, which we'll touch on a little bit later anyway, because we do need to distinguish between the pros and cons of creating licenses. So let's dive straight into what licenses are, I guess what they are not. If you let a person occupy your property, then that legal relationship is either a tenancy or it is a license. Those are the only two options. They're two very broad terms, because within those two categories, you've got lots of sub divisions. There are lots of other types of tenancy. There are lots of different types of licenses, but those are the two headline terms. And to create a tenancy, you need three things. Now, if you are on this call and you've heard of the case of Street versus Mountford, then a big gold star to you. It's easily the most famous and important case in this area because it was that case which set out basically what the three core terms of a tenancy are. That is to say, if you have these three things, then you are in tenancy town, rather than if I prepared for this, I would have come with a fun alliterative term for licenses, but I don't. You're in tenancies rather than licenses. Those three terms are rent, this concept called a term certain, which is essentially either a fixed term or a regular payment of rent, and then the third one is exclusive possession. Now, the first two of those things, rent and a term certain, I would say no landlord is going to want to compromise on those two things. They want rent, and they want regular payments of rent. I wouldn't think any arrangement which foregoes one of those two things is commercially viable. So we are really looking at, if we're trying to create a license, that is to say, exclude one of those three things, then it's exclusive possession that we're looking to get rid of. If we can get rid of exclusive possession, we don't have a tenancy, we have a license. And if we have a license, then we are dodging the Renters' Rights Act. Now, that might make it seem as though it's a really simple thing. It's just, okay, get rid of exclusive possession, black or white. That's the issue done. It is not that simple, as I'm about to explain. But when I'm talking about exclusive possession, this is the thing that we want to essentially get rid of, so that we can create the licenses. There is a fourth element which I'm going to put out there as a kind of a Chekhov's gun, because it is quite important, which is what the parties intend to create at the outset. Now, you need an intention to create legal relations if you're going to enter into any contract. And the law in this area is really developed around family businesses. So basically, like a father asking their son to do something, does that intend to create legal relations? Well, not always. If it's kind of a family, if you ask your kid to run to the shops, are you creating a contract with that person? No, you're not, because there isn't always an intention. But the parties' intentions, what they intend the contract to be, not just that they intend to create a contract at all, is quite important. And I'm going to be touching on that a little bit later, because I think that might well provide a lot of assurance to landlords who are considering giving out licenses. Okay, so it's all very well and good me sitting here saying, okay, if you do X, Y, Z, then you're more likely to have a license than a tenancy. And it's all very well and good for you to say, okay, I've done these things, I think I've got a license. What really matters, and this is where my job as a solicitor, I'm a litigator, so I'm frequently going to court. And I nearly always think about what will happen if this goes to court. That's my kind of risk-averse strategy to most things, is just, okay, how's this going to go bad for us? So what we need to know really is who is actually going to be in a position to say, call us out basically, and say, if you've got you don't have a license, you've got a tenancy, like, and then what happens if that's the case? What happens if a court agrees and says, yeah, okay, that's a tenancy, not a license? What are the consequences of that? So we need to worry about two things. We need to worry about the court, what the court says, because ultimately, if a tenant says that they have a tenancy and not a license, then their main redress through that is through the court, assuming that you've breached the rules relating to tenancies. And then the local authority also have powers to scrutinise. Now, the local authority will probably already know you, because most student landlords are running HMOs, and so you may well already be on the radar as being a kind of a student provider of housing. But this local authority also gets some additional powers under the Renters' Rights Act. So creating licenses is a bit of a fig leaf, because you're kind of saying, this is a license, therefore not an assured tenancy, therefore the council don't have any extra powers to fine you. But for local authorities, whole point is that actually you are giving out tenancies, therefore it's an assured tenancy, therefore we do have the power to fine you. The whole argument here is, are you giving out licenses or tenancies? And the local authorities, bearing in mind they're obviously going to vary from borough to borough, county to county, they are going to take their own approach to how they choose to enforce these things. I've already heard from some providers of student accommodation in certain counties where the local authority are taking a view that basically any license is not actually a license, it's a sham agreement. And if it's a sham agreement, then the court has the power to say, okay, if this is not a real agreement, then what is the legal status? And in that, if they find that the license is a sham, they're going to find it's a tenancy, because obviously that's the only other legal thing that it can be. So we have to worry about the court and the local authority. They're the ultimate arbiters of this, because it doesn't actually matter what I think or what you think, it's what they think, because they are the ones who actually have the power to find you. If you keep your head under the radar That is to say, the local authority never contact you. Yeah, maybe you're not even running a HMO, so you're not known to the local authority. Your tenants remain happy and never sue you. Then it's essentially academic, because you will not end up in front of one of these two bodies who have the power to penalise you. So happy days in that scenario, really. But we wouldn't be giving out good advice if you couldn't confidently support your position if you were put in front of that court or that local authority. So it's no good me giving out advice like, oh, just do this and hope you don't get caught. That's not good advice. We want to make sure you're maximizing your chances of success if it comes to the crunch, because that's what really matters. So exclusive possession. I said before, it wasn't really a black or white issue, it's a bit of a spectrum. And there are ways in which you can encroach on a tenant's exclusive possession of the property, so as to remove it entirely and create a license that way. So the way I like to frame this is with hotels. So in a hotel, I don't think anyone on the call is going to argue that you've got exclusive possession of your room in a hotel. There are loads of ways in which the hotel can get you out or open the door if they want to, or do lots of different things to make it clear that you are not a tenant in that room. You are a licensee. So if we say, okay, a hotel is the clearest example we can get of definitely a license. Then how do we get ourselves towards that end of the spectrum? Definitely a license, as opposed to the other end of the spectrum, which is like definitely a tenancy. Your licenses are going to fall somewhere on this spectrum, and we just want to make sure it's towards the end you want it to be, so that come to the crunch, you've got something to support your position if you end up in court or having correspondence with local authorities. So, what would we expect to see if we booked a hotel tonight to stay in? There are a few things. Now, I'm going to tackle these slightly out of order because I think probably the best example I can give is midway through this list. If you go to a hotel room that's not furnished, would you be surprised? Would you expect to walk into an empty room and expect to have to move your belongings in there? You wouldn't, would you? You would expect a hotel to be furnished with at least some amenities. So furnishings are something that could indicate that the property is towards a license or a tenancy. Now, I will say this is also a really good example because it doesn't actually mean that much either way. So that is to say, the absence of furnishings would definitely point towards the license, towards the tenancy side of things, because an unfurnished hotel room is completely unheard of. Therefore, it's unlikely to be a hotel. It's more likely to be a tenancy. But a furnished property, well, you can have furnished lets, you can have furnished tenancies, but you can have furnished licenses too. So I say furnishings are, I say, the almost the bare minimum to point yourself towards the licensing end. You can have unfurnished licenses, but that's one point where I would say it's definitely, if it's unfurnished, it's probably leaning more towards a tenancy. And it's also, now's a good time as any to state the fact that any one of these things by themselves is not a deal breaker. This is why I'm saying it's not a clear-cut thing. If I could tell you that providing a fully furnished property and once a fortnight cleaning guarantees a license, then I'd be advising you that. But it isn't that simple. So we are trying to, just like I say, push ourselves towards a certain end of the spectrum. So furnished properties probably lean more towards a license. Laundry. Hotels offer laundry service, but they don't do it as standard. They don't just come into a room and take your clothes. But it is a service that could be provided. If the hotel offer that service, then that's something that can do. Or to put it another way, do many landlords offer to do this service for their guests? For their guests, for their tenants? No, they don't. They let the tenants get on with their own laundry. So again, what we're talking about here is the provision of services that are perhaps different or more than what a normal landlord might be expected to provide. The same goes with things like room service, and so room service, not an automatic part of the hotel. You have to request it, but it is there to be done. And I'm being slightly flippant about this, but basically, if you were to provide your licensee with breakfast every morning, that would heavily indicate that it's a license rather than anything else. Sorry, just one moment. Slightly tickly nose. Now, this is where I'm kind of going back to what I said at the start. Is it worth the cost or the bother of creating licenses when you can just go with the, I guess, the certainty of an assured short hold tenancy, or an assured tenancy as it's going to be? Because if the cost of getting that fixed term is you have to make a full English every single morning and deliver that to your occupiers, that doesn't seem particularly worth it to me. It might be worth it for you. I don't know how much you want these things, but you have to bear in mind there is essentially a price to be paid for providing these services in terms of just the logistics, the cost, the time, the energy on your part. That brings us down to cleaning. Now, cleaning is probably the strongest single thing that a landlord can do, because a landlord to a tenancy does not usually provide cleaning as part of the tenancy. And the best part about the cleaners is that they have to go into the property in order to carry it out. So that usually means they have a set of keys, and that usually means they if they have a set of keys, then that means that the tenant is not in charge of whether or not they enter that property. Now, a bit like with a hotel room, you could put a little card on the outside of your door, and you could say, "Do not disturb. I don't want my room cleaned." That's fine, and perhaps out of etiquette, the cleaners won't force entry in that scenario. But it doesn't change that if push comes to shove, they have the right to do that in a hotel. They can gain access to the room. They can do those things, and that's all underpinned by the right that they have to go into the property to do things like, cleaning, which in a tenancy, if a tenant says no, you can't come in, then that's that. If you go in and you've trespassed, and you've probably opened yourself up to a world of legal pain. But part of the appeal of a license, and we'll touch on this when we touch on what the parties intend to create, is that the tenants, if you're offering cleaning as part of your package, and in fact the only reason you're offering cleaning at all is because you want to create a license, then the kind of applicants you get are people who would naturally want that service. So it's unlikely that they might say, "Oh, please don't come in today. I'm ill," or something like that. And again, out of etiquette, you could miss a clean. That wouldn't be a problem in of itself, because, like I say, push comes to shove, if the cleaners want to go in, they can go in. That's what you're agreeing with the occupier when you create that license, and that's not something you'd be agreeing if you were creating a tenancy where the tenant has the right of exclusive possession. Another thing about a hotel, which may not be directly transferable, particularly if you have, I guess you could say, a relatively small portfolio, is that if there is a problem with your room in a hotel, you can just move to an identical room and carry on that way. This is essentially saying is that when you book a hotel room, you're not necessarily booking room 101. You are just asking for a room. It might well be a room with a specific specification. You might get a double bed, a single, a suite, or something like that. You might say, okay, these are the things I want, but the actual room choice where you stay is entirely up to the hotel. So if you are able to do something like that, and this would require either a building which has multiple rooms which are similar to each other, or at least, like I say, multiple of kind of similar types of room. You might have a big room, a small room, something like that, an ensuite room. But if you have a row of, let's say, 3 or 4 terraced houses, they might all be identical on the inside. So if the ensuite room in house number 1 doesn't work, and you had something in your contract that says, in that scenario, we would put you in the ensuite room in house 2, then that would be indicative of a license. The issue there is you have to actually be able to perform that, because as landlords, you're probably going to be looking to maximize your revenue at any given time. A hotel can assure itself that at any given time they probably have some vacancies, so they can move you around as required. And look, if you get a free upgrade, you get a free upgrade. If you've got quite a small portfolio, and you can't guarantee that they would be in an equivalent or better room, then you can't really be promising things like this. But it is an option. And again, we could just be talking about, if you have a unit which has, say, 20 identical rooms, then you can move people around that. If you I guess aimed to have occupancy at, say, 90%, give yourself a bit of breathing room. would it be worth, I guess, the difference in rental income versus 100% occupancy if it allowed you to create licenses so that you can move people around in the event of an issue? It's just something to bear in mind. Um, Another thing, just while I'm on the slide, is how do you often book a hotel or even Airbnb? You go onto a website, you say, I want these rooms for these dates. You don't get referenced. You might have to pay a deposit, but they're not referencing you or checking you in any way. You just say, I can pay this. They might pay up front, and then the rooms are yours for those days. I have seen student operators who run kind of a portal like this. They basically say, we've got these rooms available for this period of time. And the tenant basically just books out 9 months. The duration of the contract doesn't necessarily mean it is or it isn't a license or a tenancy. That duration is a bit of a red herring, to be honest with you, because it's not one of those three core components. If you stay in the property for a year but you don't have exclusive possession, then it is a license. But the freedom and the availability for the tenant to just choose a room, that would lead towards a license rather than a tenancy. So whilst I'm not encouraging anybody to not reference their occupiers, and again on the flip side, referencing the people who occupy your properties is not indicative, is not a deal breaker either way. The method in which the person chooses to rent with you can be something you can point towards and just say this is more akin to an Airbnb serviced accommodation hotel scenario, which puts it in the license territory rather than a tenancy, where you might say, okay, we will formally sit down and agree a 1-year fixed term or something like this. It's also worth my saying is that you can, even if you don't, a lot of people actually don't reference students. They just assume maybe students won't pass referencing. They only reference guarantors. Now, again, do you get a guarantor for a hotel room? Not usually. But is that indicative either way? Is it a deal breaker either way? No. This is a holistic thing, so you can always have certain some of these elements, which again I'm just throwing out there as just examples of things that can indicate whether there is or isn't exclusive possession. It's a smorgasbord. Most people choose cleaning because it's probably the easiest and clearest thing to prove, but you could provide other things. You could refuse to provide other things. For example, if you could say, okay, we'll provide cleaning and laundry services, but we're going to insist on referencing in the guarantor. Is that a tenancy or a license? I'm afraid I couldn't actually say. And like I said earlier, what I think doesn't actually matter that much. But what you could say is that in that scenario, you are providing services, the occupier does not have exclusive possession. Therefore, court or local authority, whoever's breathing down your neck about it, you can say, look, this is a license as far as I'm concerned, even though there might be some elements of the smorgasbord which are pointing towards it being a tenancy. Overall, we're leaning towards license. So why do you want to create licenses at all? Like I say, it seems like a bit of effort, doesn't it? Compared to just creating a tenancy where you just let people get on with it, you've got to arrange for extra services, extra things to be done that you wouldn't normally have to do. Well, the main reason, as I touched on earlier with the renters' rights, is a lot of landlords are very attached to the fixed term, particularly in the student market where you are guaranteed churn every single year. You want to know that the occupier is going to stay for the duration, or at least be liable for the duration, and also that they probably have the incentive to vacate over the summer so that it can be cleaned and ready for the next cohort to come in. Obviously, if they do stay, then I guess you have your next year's rent guaranteed as well, don't you? But you don't. Actually, it's probably worth me touching on that, which is that not a lot, in my experience, not a lot of students stay, and I don't. And maybe Ali has some stats on that. But currently, if you're like to students on say an AST, you're not all serving Section 21 notices to expire in June. Most students leave. And I think the expectation is still the same, that most students are going to leave because they have the incentive to. They don't necessarily want to stay in the empty house over the summer. They perhaps want to go home or do other things. If they did stay, even if you created a license, if they did stay, you would still have to evict those people through the courts. Creating a license does not get around the Protection from Eviction Act. Some licenses are exempt from the Protection from Eviction Act, but the ones that we're creating are not. So they still would require notice, which would be a notice to quit. They would still require possession proceedings to get them out. In practice, if they stay into June, you're not going to be able to evict them by September. It's not going to happen. Even with the best courts in the country, that's not going to happen. But like I say, practically speaking, that might not be something that arises particularly often. And for as long as they're there, they need to carry on paying the rent. So, worst case scenario, you're still getting paid your rent, even if it does cause a bit of a spanner in the proverbial works. I've touched on local authorities already, and like I say, I think some local authorities do take the stance that any license agreement is a sham. That does not mean that they're correct, and it is for you to, I guess, robustly protect your position. But the best thing I could possibly say about this is hedging your bets when it comes to creating licenses might not be a bad idea. And the best example I can give of this is in relation to deposit claims. So, as I hope you're all aware, because I think most landlords on this call will currently be in the AST market, I hope you're all aware that deposits need to be protected within 30 days and you need to prescribe information within 30 days of the deposit being paid. I'm really hoping that's not news to anybody. If it is, maybe get off this call and do some Googling. The best so if you create a license, you don't have to protect the deposit or give prescribed information, right? That's one of the benefits, if you like, of a license is that there are fewer statutory requirements on you, because most of the statutory requirements all relate to ASTs or assured tenancies as they'll become. However, you can still choose to protect your deposits if you run a license. And this is quite key, because if you have a scenario where a tenant says, this isn't a license, this is a tenancy, therefore you should have protected my deposit and given prescribed information, therefore I'm going to sue you for 3 times the value of a deposit. That argument is entirely academic if you have actually protected the deposit or given the prescribed information. You take the wind out of their sails, basically. If they go to court and say that this should be a tenancy, and because it's a license, then I'm entitled to buy deposits. In fact, the court would say, well, okay, fine, it's a tenancy. We don't, but so what? What of it? Because if you've complied with the requirements anyway, then you're good. So it might not be a bad idea to still be doing a lot of the things that you're currently doing. With regards to protecting deposits, serving prescribed information, serving everything else that needs to be done, complying with the Tenant Fees Act, keeping that structure in place protects you from a good deal of harm. Because I suspect, whilst local authorities have the incentive to penalise landlords, because they get to keep revenue that they generate from those penalties, their priorities are always going to be against, I guess you could say, the bad landlords. So if you're providing high quality accommodation that students want, and there's no disrepair, you're not turning up at the door with the heavies to get them out at the end of the fixed term, you're just behaving in a good and honest way. And to be honest with you, the landlords who are bad landlords are not often signing up to webinars like this. So I dare say you're already kind of in the good camp with that. The local authorities' priorities are going to be on the most egregious breaches. There might be some low-hanging fruit, I'll be honest. If you're known to the local authority, then they might say, well, let's just do a little audit, let's just see what agreements people are hanging out and reap the rewards of that. I can't promise you that they're not going to do that. Because to be honest, if I was in their shoes, that's exactly what I would be doing, is just to make sure that the people who are known to me are the ones are compliant. Get that revenue in, and hey, then maybe you can use that revenue to go after the bad landlords. You set yourself up quite well financially if you're a local authority. But yeah, hedging your bets is not a bad shout. And again, if you choose to protect your deposit, that does not necessarily mean you're kind of pushing yourself towards the tenancy end of the spectrum, because protecting your deposit doesn't have anything to do with exclusive possession. All you can say is just as a matter of course, that's just what you choose to do. The options available. The tenants want it. If they knew about it, they probably would want it. Yeah, so I think that's quite a safe example to rely upon. So the amount of times, because I've already advised many landlords on this, the amount of landlords who come to me and say, "Look, I want to create licenses. I'm going to do cleaning every 2 weeks. Is that enough?" And the answer I always give is, Well, it's something. Is it enough? Is entirely down to the court and the local authority. The more you do, the better. So if you can change that cleaning from once a fortnight to once a week, that's better. That's more likely to be a license. If you change that cleaning from once a week to twice a week, even better. You can always do more. You can always provide more services, because what you really need to be doing is constantly encroaching on the occupier's right to exclusive possession of the property. If the occupier is having their exclusive possession constantly encroached upon, then they can't possibly say that they have a tenancy. You'd logically think. So the more you do, the better. And I want to be clear here: encroachment doesn't mean harassment. I don't mean let yourself in with some keys and just walk around a little bit and then say you're encroaching that way. I mean these have to be within tiptoed around the rules. These are services that you are providing that the occupier is agreeing to receive at the outset. So you don't encroach by setting up a tent in the front garden. I'm being flippant here, but I want to be really clear that doing something which is illegal, or at least something which can get you taken to court, um, isn't the goal here. It's to provide, I guess, a mutually beneficial thing. The occupier wants these services. You want a license. Here's one way to achieve that, and that perhaps leads us to what I think might be the kind of a nugget of this. There's been some cases recently to do with they're called property guardians. Basically, if you have a massive old, usually publicly owned building, but basically an abandoned building that you don't want to be filled with squatters, then you can employ an agency, and they will fill it with what are called property guardians. And basically, it's just a bunch of people who live inside the place, and the idea being that they're there to keep it safe, so the squatters don't come in, but they also leave when the property is going to be used again. So it's a relatively common thing, or certainly seems to be increasing in prominence. But there's been a good history of interesting cases coming out of property guardians, because a lot of property guardians want to claim that they're tenants. And there's this case, Global 100 versus Lavella, which is I think it might be, I guess, if not the freshest, then certainly the most important one at the moment, which was about the contractual intention of the parties at the outset. And there were lots of clauses in the contract between these two people, which basically made it clear that the person did not have exclusive possession of the property. There were all kinds of onerous burdens on them. They didn't have a single room. They might have occupied a single room in the building, but they weren't necessarily entitled to just that room or exclusive possession of that room. And this is where there might be some cross application for licenses. So if you are letting to a student who doesn't know the first thing about the difference between licenses and tenancies, and let's be honest, what 18-year-old does? Even the law students won't know, because they won't have set foot in the auditorium yet. But they won't understand the difference. You are not dealing with knowledgeable consumers of legal services. You're dealing with people who have barely ceased to be children, legally adults, but immature in many ways. You are a landlord who is attending a webinar about the legal nuances of licenses. You are far more knowledgeable about the contract that you're entering into than the student. How If you are seen to be leveling the playing field somewhat, if you are informing the person proactively that this is what a license is, this is what a tenancy is, a tenancy grants you these rights. So, for example, you might want to, and by the way, I do think this is really good advice. I would seriously be encouraging you to do this more than anything else that I've said so far, as leaning towards the license. Because if you can say that your occupier knew full well what the pros and cons of entering into a tenancy or a license were, they were informed at the outset and still made the choice to proceed, you're in so much more of a stronger position. Particularly because the local authority, I think, are less likely to view you as being underhand or manipulative in any way, because you've informed them of their rights. You basically said, are you sure you don't want a tenancy? Because if you want a tenancy, go somewhere else. I only give out license. But if you want a fixed term and you want cleaning services or whatever services you might be providing, then that's great. We can do business, but here's what you're giving up. If you want an assured tenancy where you can give notice at any time, That's fine. There are other landlords who can provide those services. We provide licenses. I think that will go really far to getting you to where you want to be in terms of security. So I think almost basically the first page of your agreement, your license agreement, or even the kind of the pre-agreement stage, ought to be a little page just to say, here's what an assured tenancy does, here's what a license does. We're giving out licenses. Do you want to proceed? Yes or no? And if you do, great. Let's look forward to a good year together. That's the end of my slide. So I would hand over to Ali now for some delicious data.
Thanks very much, Ryan. That was fantastic. I'm just going to give you the power to share your screen, Ali. 1 second. Oh, actually, Ryan, you're going to need to do it. Can you just click on the panelists and give Ali hosting rights?
Yes.
Oh, no, that's all right. I can do it. Sorry, I've done it. Do apologise. Okay, Ali, you should have the power.
Great. Hopefully you can all see that now. I'm just going to briefly share some research that we've conducted over the past month or so. So we've carried out a student survey, capturing feedback from students across almost 100 universities on their experience of their university, their experience of their city, and also the accommodation that they're in. Ryan mentioned cleaning services. This is something that we specifically asked students about. So I'm going to take us through their feedback on that, as well as some of the things that they said would improve their experience a bit more generally. So just to give you a broad general picture of student satisfaction, most students are pretty satisfied with their accommodation, 7.3 out of 10 being the average score given. When we break that satisfaction score down by accommodation type, what we can see here is that private housing is performing slightly above average in terms of overall satisfaction. When it comes to value for money, other than living at home, it's considered the best sort of paid for option. It also sits above average when it comes to satisfaction with the condition of the property. Students were asked what improvements they wanted to see, and these are the top 5 themes that came through really. So perhaps not surprisingly, lower rent was something that almost 1/3 of students we surveyed commented on. Also better communication, particularly around sort of responses to queries and issues. And then a couple of things that do sort of start to connect into that topic of cleaning, keeping on top of the condition of the property. So faster maintenance, so issues being dealt with promptly and properly, improvements to property condition, some students feeling their accommodation was quite dated and in poor condition. And then final thing, students ideally wanting to see utilities included in the rent. So as mentioned earlier, we did specifically dig into the topic of cleaning services as part of the research. And you can see here that almost 70% of students living in shared accommodation said that they would find a cleaning service useful. Of those that wanted a cleaning service, here were some of the main reasons that were given for that. So firstly, convenience, busy schedules, especially when balancing uni work with part-time jobs as well, makes that sort of convenience of a cleaning service appealing. Frustrations that come with sharing a house with others. So we know that keeping on top of cleaning in a shared house can be a bit of a source of conflict and frustration that students said a cleaning service could help alleviate. And then also hygiene, so students just recognising that regular cleaning makes for a more sort of healthy and hygienic living environment. On the flip side of that, we had 16% of students saying that they wouldn't want to use a cleaning service. And here are some of the reasons that they gave for that. So Firstly, cost concern. We know that affordability is key for students. It's something that came out of the research as a whole, just how much of an impact being up against it financially has on the overall university experience. And there was some resistance to paying extra for anything that felt unnecessary or unaffordable to students. Privacy concerns was also mentioned by some students. So a bit of uneasiness there around people that they don't know coming into what they consider to be their space. And then finally, that it's just manageable as is. So some students feeling that it's manageable to keep their accommodation clean and tidy, so they don't have a need for any additional help with that. So just kind of as a sort of quick summary, really, key takeaway, most students said they find a cleaning service useful, but it has to feel like good value for money for them. So I'm going to hand back over to Nick now for some questions.
Thanks very much, Ali. That was brilliant and really concise. So thanks for covering those key points so well. Ali and I were chatting before the session. So Ali is regularly doing research and getting student feedback, and we will be running a webinar in the near future to cover some of that. So that's just a little bit of a taste of what Ali has got. So we will be sharing more of that later in the year. So we have had quite a few questions come in. Just before we do that, Ryan, just so to take it really down to sort of the basics, and because that's how I operate. But essentially, one of the key things with license agreements really that is of interest, am I right, is effectively you can operate on that fixed term. So if a landlord is really wedded to this idea of, okay, I want somebody to move in July and move out in June, that is effectively the only route that you've got left post renters' right. Is that a fair, Nick, basic summary of the situation?
Yeah, you've got it, because the default tenancy is going to be an assured tenancy, which you can't have a fixed term on. There are non-assured tenancies, but they have to fall within very specific circumstances. And I've referred earlier about the PBSA exemption. That's one of those circumstances. So it's not something that the average landlord could just create. It basically has to be the facts. The facts exist before you go into it. So licenses are the only way to do that. And I think I have to question just how much landlords want to do it, because sometimes sometimes really want this. They really want their fixed term. They can't conceive of a world without it. But there are plenty of landlords who are just going to continue letting on an assured basis, and the world won't fall in for them. So, and like I say, this is really about the trade-off, because you are going to have to do more than you're currently doing. If you're currently giving out ASTs, then you're giving out tenancies. So you're going to have to do more. Is it worth it? Might not be. That's not the call for me. I'm just here to say, if you are going to do it, then here's some things you could do.
Yeah, no, brilliant, Ryan. And I think you've made that really clear. So, for example, we had a question from Simon Davidson, can the cleaning be once a week? And I think you've covered, it's that spectrum, isn't it? The more that you do, I think you've been really clear that
the more the better.
Well, yeah, I get that, and I think you've answered that, and also Natasha's question about guarantors. Simon Davidson, really popular on the questions, is, would this work for a 1/2 bedroom property?
Yes, because we're not necessarily talking about anything that's exclusive to, say, HMOs. I think that's the answer to the question, really. I guess, how much cleaning would that one property take, really? But I guess, how messy are students? Well, I think you guys know more than me about how messy they could be. But yeah, there's nothing HMO exclusive about any of the advice I've given. You can create licenses for smaller properties. There's no problem.
Yep, understood. Okay, this is, I don't know if this is one you want to come back to, but I'm going to ask it. So here, one of the attendees has raised a point that some HMO licenses stipulate the type of tenancy that's allowed. If a landlord with a license chooses a license route, would this be a breach of the license, the HMO license? effectively.
I think the person asking the question knows the answer to that, which is to say yes. Basically, if a license is saying you've got to give out an assured tenancy, then you've got to give out an assured tenancy. Otherwise, you are in breach. Now, there are methods to challenge that. It's not an area of law that I know much about, to be honest with you. But it's essentially an area called public law, which is challenging the decisions of local government bodies. So, if you felt that this license was particularly onerous and there was no good reason why you shouldn't be able to go out licenses if that's what you want, and indeed that's what the students want, because as Ali said, there will be some people, and I wanted to think, although Ali gave some students wanted it, some students don't. That's the same is true for all people. But inherently, the people who want cleaning services will almost be self-selecting, because if you're marketing your property saying we do these things, then the ones who want it will be the ones who are knocking on the door. The ones who don't want it won't be as interested. So if we're talking about providing, you want to provide these services, students want those services, but you're essentially, well, I mean, you could give out tenancies, but let's be honest here. The real reason why you want to provide these services is to not give out tenancies. Like that, you have motivation to give out licenses. Then I guess you need to have a discussion with the local authority about it and just say, look, I'm a good landlord. I've been if you've got a license, obviously you do have a license, or at least you know about licensing conditions. So you'll know to local authorities that, look, I've been on your books for ages. You know who I am. I'm a good landlord. You've carried out many inspections of my property, I imagine. Why can't I give out licenses? Why can't I provide these services so that the students get what they want, and everyone's happy?
Brilliant, thank you. The another question that's come in, I think it's come a couple of times, is who should pay for gas, electricity, etc. if it's a license? Does that matter?
It's a good question, because I think it's just a nice way to apply some of the stuff we've talked about so far. It's not a given either way. It doesn't have to be a particular way. You could bundle the utilities in with the rent, but that happens for tenancies too. So I think it's one of those scenarios where I don't think it matters particularly either way, because both licenses and tenancies have examples where you either do or don't include the utilities in with the rent. So I don't think it matters particularly. I don't think it's anything anyone will put any particular weight on. But it's a good example.
Okay, thank you. Rolly's asked, could a landlord offer one price for tenancy and another price for license? So come back to your kind of clarity thing. Could you do that? Could you say, okay, if you want a license with cleaning, it's this price. If you want
I think the issue, so I get what they're saying, because basically if you're providing services, then the rent could go up. Basically you're absorbing the cost of that makes sense to me. The issue you've got is if you're marketing a tenancy post renters' rights, you can only have one price. So I think you can't do that because of the risk associated with marketing a tenancy at a particular rate.
Okay, just while I've got you on marketing the tenancy, with a license agreement, is there any restrictions about how far up front you can market the property? So can you agree a license 7-8 months in advance? Is it because there's restrictions, I think, isn't in the renters' rights about how I think it's 6 months in advance is as much as you can go, isn't it? Before you
Now, I've got an instinctive answer here, but I've got to be honest, I haven't looked at it from that perspective before. So what I would suggest I do, I'm going to make a little note on and read what the renters' rights says about advance rent, and I think it's just limited to assured tenancies, but that advance rent also amends the Tenant Fees Act, which can apply in certain circumstances to licenses. So let me come back to you on that. Good question. Well done.
Okay. So there's questions around cleaning, and I think you've covered this because someone said, okay, if we only clean the common areas, does that, again, it's that spectrum thing, is it?
Well, actually, I think so. The common areas, that's a good point. So if we're talking about common areas, what we're talking about is usually individual room lets and then shared common areas. Now, the shared common areas, they're already on a license. That's the way it legally works, because no one has exclusive possession of the shared areas, because no one can exclude other people from using them. So you can give out currently ASTs for rooms and licenses for the common parts. So if you're just cleaning the common areas, you're not actually encroaching on their room, which is the area they have exclusive possession of. So it does have to go into rooms, basically.
Okay.
I think perhaps one of the watch, if you're going to remember anything I've said over the last hour, you're going to have to do more than you're currently doing. So if you are already providing cleaning services in the common parts, but you're giving out ASTs for the rooms, then that's probably your answer. You are already giving out tenancies, so you're going to have to encroach on the rooms if you want to create licenses for those rooms.
Okay, fair enough. That's really clear. Thank you. So someone's asked, a license can be granted for a single room as well as for a sort of joint and several agreement. I assume that would be the case, wouldn't it? In fact, wouldn't it be more compelling for a single room let rather than a joint and several? Because that would
Um,
just more of
Yeah, I think this might be one of those things where it's probably not a factor either way, because you can do both. You can do both for tenancies and for licenses, and therefore it's not a practice in of itself that says, oh, okay, this is more likely to be a license or more likely to be a tenancy. In fact, it probably segues on quite nicely from the last answer I gave, which is that as long as you are going into the rooms, then you're fine. I don't think there's a problem inherently with letting out individual rooms on a license basis or letting out the entire property on a license basis. You just got to encroach. That's it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So because because we've had 43 questions, I think what I'm going to
It
do,
keeps going up.
yeah, I think what I'm going to do is call it a day there, because otherwise I think we'll be here all day. So what I'll do is I'll take those questions. I think some of them are common themes. So we'll come back to those, Ryan. I think if that's okay, rather than go through
Yeah.
all of them. I love that someone's asked about the nature of breakfast, because I know, and this is really telling for you. You
The
went
nature of
straight.
breakfast.
You went, yes, because you went straight for a full English, Ryan, which I think says a lot about your choice of breakfast. Because someone's asking about a continental breakfast here,
Ah, I see.
which would
Does
be much
granola
easier
indicate?
much easier to deliver. But yes, so I'm going to call it a day there. If there's any questions that we haven't covered, then I will ask Ryan if we do need to cover those in the follow up. I just wanted to make a couple of points to just let everybody know. Pre the session, I was chatting with Ryan. I've been approached quite a lot by our landlords to see whether we can get some kind of template agreement. So template tenancy agreement, template license. So I will explore that with Ryan and see whether we can make that available to you. So if you kind of watch this space, we'll come back to you on it. And the other thing that I just, well, there were two things that really I noted. One is apparently if you ask your kid to go to the shop, that's not a contract, even though I've told my kids it's a verbal contract. So I'll have to backtrack on that. The second one is your thing about being able to book a room online. So one of the things I'm currently working on for our HMOs and shared housing, don't have to be a HMO, we just call them HMOs, is that ability to book a room online. So if that also pushes all people a little bit towards the sort of license spectrum, that's quite helpful. So if you're interested in that, please do get in touch. We currently have an instant book service for our PBSA clients. So you can go on a room, they can press a button, make a booking. We're trialing the introduction of that onto our non-HMO stock, if you like, not specifically because it will enable you to operate with a license rather than a tenancy, just because it's something that we feel that students want. So if you're interested in exploring that avenue, and it also helps push you all down the spectrum, as we're calling it, then that's something that we're currently working on. So if we call it a day there, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Ryan and Ali. Just absolutely fantastic content, makes my job so much easier. I really enjoyed it. I got lots of information out of there, and also really useful to have the student perspective, which Ali's bringing in terms of what students think. It doesn't surprise me that students are interested in this. We just see students get ever more ambitious in terms of what they want from their student accommodation. So really helpful to have that. So thanks so much. I'm going to sort of end the session here, and I will follow up with the recording and the slides. So thank you so much.